For 40 years, my mother kept her silence about the camps. And finally, in 1981, before the commission hearings on redress, she passionately broke her silence. I have included portions of her testimony in this poem, Breaking Silence. There are miracles that happen, she said, from the silences in the glass caves of our ears, from the crippled tongue, testimonies waiting like winter. Mr. Commissioner, the U.S. Army Signal Corps confiscated our property. It was subjected to vandalism and ravage. I was forced to sign documents giving you the authority to take.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival. My name is Rob Busher, and I'm the board chair, and it's my profound pleasure to introduce two friends and collaborators of the festival, Aisha Fukushima and Anthony Brown, who are going to be having a really exciting conversation here tonight. I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of context before we get into the conversation, since both of them have actually been collaborators of the festival in the past. And it's just really exciting to be able to introduce two individuals whom I have profound respect for, both as a fellow musician and fellow mixed-race Japanese American. The kind of work that both Anthony and Aisha do, I think, has a lot of parallels with regards to utilizing kind of justice-based movements within the advocacy as artist activists who are capable of kind of bringing their full selves into the music that they compose and perform, and giving it so much more of a serious kind of theme and real advocacy spin that compared to a lot of musicians that are active today. And over the years, kind of knowing both of their work, it made sense for us to bring them both in conversation together. So I'll introduce them both briefly. Anthony, we've known him since 2015. We had the privilege of inviting Anthony along with two of his fellow musicians from the Asian American Jazz Orchestra here to Philadelphia, where we did a performance at the Barnes Foundation as part of an Asian American Heritage Month celebration. And, certainly that was an exciting opportunity for the festival, and we greatly enjoyed having them here. Aisha, we had the opportunity to connect with a little bit more recently, but she was one of the main artists in our Asian American hip hop showcase at the 2019 festival. So, I'm just really excited to hear you have this conversation. I know that it's going to be a really enriching discussion, and I will leave it at that. So please take it away.
Thank you so much, Rob. And again, happy fatherhood.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're on a journey now, let me tell you. So, Aisha, this is the first time we actually met, and we're meeting virtually. But I feel like we've known each other. Our task today, besides talking about art and activism, is to share other stories and thoughts about the four subjects that they identified in the ad or the announcement for this event. And those were shared identity, mixed heritage, solidarity, and then finally, the power of creating visions of justice and liberation through music. Of course, you're a multimedia artist, so that could involve other things, movement, song. It can involve whatever else you bring to the table on this. And I think we kind of communicated. We've never even talked before to each other, but we thought that we would start with you because you were just in the last year's festival. The demographics for the festival is probably tilted towards your age group than mine. So I thought if you shared some of your stories about shared identity, that could launch this whole event.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to just say that we did have a chance to touch base even for a little while. And I feel like that just confirmed how much we feel like family. So I'm so grateful to share this space with you. I also, one tradition of mine, whether I'm on the road virtually or in person, is just to acknowledge that the land that we live and thrive upon, particularly the Indigenous land. Here in Philadelphia, I want to acknowledge the Lenape occupied land that I live and thrive upon. We know that everywhere spanning from one of my hometowns and home places in Japan and Yokohama, among other parts of Japan, we know that there's also Indigenous peoples from the Ainu to Okinawa and Ryukyu. I always also think about Seattle and Duwamish territory that's occupied. So just taking a moment to acknowledge that and take a deep breath. Thank you for taking that moment. So one thing that I woke up thinking about was I just kept hearing this poem that I wrote called Butterfly. And so I figured it would be a good way to start off and then to jump in to telling a little bit more about my story. So if that sounds good to y'all, I'll just jump in with that. In the land of the free and the home of the... How can this be the land of the free and the home of the brave when so many people live in fear? I captivate, reincarnate with an imagination state of mind. Teacher, I am more than those underestimations combined. Do you mind? I am growing here, cocooned in a cacophony of sounds and silences like ancestors' footsteps at pace with my heart. I am more than your labels make me out to be. I am more than those labels make me out to be. I am human, first and foremost. I am human, first and foremost, except for when I am a butterfly. Whose metamorphosis reopens the orifices of our connectivity. We are more connected than we pretend to be. Let these wings make me free as I fly on the winds of change. A new season has come, rearranged. The old one is done, interchanged, and living as a butterfly has taught me one thing: there is no beginning or ending, only shape-shifting. So let us call this a transformation. Let us call this a reformation. My wing pattern is a blueprint for elevation, and there ain't no stopping this reclamation constructed in a language of sounds and silences that must be read between the lines until we realize that this whole reality is constructed. The education that values one human life over another is corrupted. Migration is a way of life. I said, migration is a way of life, and I float by pushing myself up on matter that I cannot see, like dreams shape-shift in a medium of creativity. Sometimes it's hard to be a butterfly when you were built to soar, and some try to colonize the sky. How can you divide the air? Must be hard to breathe if we don't want to share. This is the life of a butterfly. Karma and samsara, birth and rebirth. I am woman and I know my worth. Monarch but not imperial. I spit philosophies, it ain't ethereal. I keep rising and shining, wondering, can you hear me though? I keep rising and shining, wondering, can you hear me though? So as we float, as we fly, as we flutter, the warmth of prayers that melt like butterflies over aching wounds. Erected in remembrance, stand high like pyramid tombs. This is for you, and for you, and for you, and for all of you. Hold your head high as you speak your truths. I said birds flying high, you know how I feel. Yes, sun in the sky, you know how, yes. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for we, yeah. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for we. Ooh, and we feeling
Good.
yeah, that's right, y'all. Good. Give it up for yourselves.
Shoot, you get a standing
Oh,
ovation. Standing ovation.
Thank you,
Shoot.
Anthony.
Oh.
So I think in some ways, thank you for journeying together with us, for everyone who's tuned in. I'm so honored to share this space with you, Anthony. I think in some ways that poem speaks a little bit to all the different elements and roots of where I'm coming from. I'll tell a little bit in just orating a little bit of my life story, and then I would love for us to jump over to you and hear more about you and your journey as we continue to delve into this conversation. So Eric, if you don't mind pulling up slide, the imagery that we've prepared. So as you all may have gathered, I have roots spanning from Seattle, Washington to Yokohama, Japan. Yokohama ni sondeimashita. And I grew up in many ways. I would get to an airport and be like, I'm home, because I was kind of used to this constant transition. As you can see from this photo, I was lively even as a kid, using my voice. And I think that this global upbringing, as I like to call it, in many ways, it taught me that boundaries and borders are constructed. When I looked out the window of an airplane, for example, it started to get me to question the boundaries and borders that even sometimes we set up between one another. My parents were booking agents in the music industry, booking the likes of James Brown, Funkadelic, TLC, Michelle Ndegeocello, Natalie Cole, all these incredible artists. And I was kind of behind the scenes of that, absorbing the vibrations of that music and seeing in many ways how that global resonance became a common language, a common connector, and even a foundation, an infrastructure, a technology, and a culture for global movement building across many different identities. Eric, if you don't mind popping over to the next photo. Also, shout out to all the incredible folks making things happen behind the scenes with this. Y'all are incredible. So my mom, also a global citizen. She speaks Mandarin Chinese. And I think in many ways, folks make a lot of assumptions about the cultures and how they aligned in my household and how I grew up. But I think my mom was very much kind of a trailblazer in my life or in my upbringing, in knowing and seeing and understanding how we can be multifaceted, be global citizens. And her travels to Japan, which led her to then meet my father, although they divorced eventually, that bond and her kind of global heritage, I think definitely informed who I am and who I'm constantly becoming. Eric, if you don't mind popping to the next photo. As I mentioned, going back and forth between Seattle, Washington, and Yokohama, Japan. I think back one more, you can get a snapshot of the school I went to, right? This is a mini snapshot of mini Aisha. I'm guessing y'all can guess who I am in this photo. So, and literally splitting, for example, first grade between, Seattle elementary school and elementary school in Yokohama. And then Eric, you could scroll to the next photo. And it's places like Seattle. My mom was heavily involved in also bringing up a vibrant arts and culture scene. So I think about Festival Sundiata, one of the largest festivals or African diaspora festivals for the arts, and many other cultural expression elements. And my mom always laughs when she sees this photo, because she would say, the minute the music started, I would just start running back and forth across the stage and feeling energized. And all of a sudden, like finding a second wind or a third wind, or, something resonated, and I knew that there was power in that, and I needed to share it. So I'm very thankful that the bands were very gracious to allow me to run back and forth. For the last two photos, we can scroll forth. This, I think, growing up in Bellevue, Washington, so just outside of Seattle in a predominantly upper middle class, predominantly white neighborhood. We were the first family of color, my mother and I, once my parents divorced, to live in our condominium complex. That was, in many ways, sometimes it felt like a war of attrition, in the sense that I would have neighbors who would slash our tires, I think, over 16 times as the only family of color, right? So I'm an avid cyclist, but that's part of how I learned to cycle, because I needed to get to school, right? I remember classmates asking me questions. The question that always arises: what are you? Not before it's like, hey, how's it going? What's good? What's your name? It's like, what are you? Right? And when I wouldn't want to answer that question, and the minute I heard that question, I see a box pop up, just like when people say, where are you from? No, where are you really from? All these, I think it's kind of a similar vibe of question that pops up. And so when I would resist that or play with that, I think it started to get me thinking about many ways in which I continue to advocate for racial justice and many intersectional forms of justice today. And I think those roots in part started from that upbringing and that sensitization, not only to racial injustices, but thinking about class in my neighborhood. Like, some of my classmates received Mercedes-Benz when they turned 16, or $100 for every single A that they got. And I remember, getting a math test back and seeing a huge F on the front. And I was so stressed, wanting to get to college, like, had this vision. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to just study harder for the final. And I turned to one of my partners, my neighbor. She was a young blonde woman. I said, can we compare answers? She had received an A on this test. I just want to figure out what I did wrong so I can do better for the final. And she was so gracious to say, yes, of course. I took a look at her answers, and she had the same math, the same answers, right? The only difference was the grade at the top. And so when I rose my hand and mentioned this to my teacher, she said, everyone look at Aisha. This, when I had mentioned, like, I think there might have been a misunderstanding, a mistake. She said, everyone look at Aisha. She's a bad example. She's questioning my authority. And this is coming from someone who's an educator, a facilitator. Like, this is my love work. But these are also some of my early experiences in education, including my music classes. And I think back to, like, sitting in my grandma's Baptist church and speaking to elders who would talk about what they had gone through with, especially with our African-American elders. They had books that had ripped out pages and all these different things. It would be transferred from the segregated schools over, and people would vandalize essentially these books, knowing that children of color would be reading them, right? And I could see some of the connectivity over time, and wanted to catalyze my love of the arts in order to push and to challenge the frameworks that we use to see one another and to see the world, and then to act in the world. And this last photo I'll show, Eric, if you don't mind. In many ways, this has brought me on kind of both an incredible and unexpected journey. I think about touring and working with groups like Mixed Roots in Japan. This was at a Blackanese and Proud panel in Osaka. And I remember some of the young people there, when they first heard about me, I was one of the oldest and one of the first people who shared a similar background to them, and who had just arrived on the spot, and they were just like, right? And I said, hi. And then they all collectively, a whole group of kids just ran away. I was like, uh-oh. Okay. So I walked up to them, and then, we started to cipher it out. Eventually they gave us some words to, like, try to incorporate into an attempted freestyle rap. Let's see how that went. But, but I think this makes me think about all the points of connectivity that we find. And even in this space, there was so much diversity. There were young children who had everything from, like, Ghanaian cultural influences, or took a train from Tokyo to get there, all these different kind of corners and aspects of how we walked into the space. And at the same time, music kind of became a catalyst, an amplifier, and also a venue for creativity, for us to dare to imagine different futures, and also to find one another. And I'm not just saying this in terms of racialized boxes or backgrounds, but literally the ways in which we find one another, that we need each other so profoundly, so deeply in times like these. I think this is something that music keeps surfacing for me, that keeps reminding me how deeply we're connected and that we need each other. And it's a practice that helps us work towards that healing, work towards that liberation, in my humble opinion, at least in my own experience, towards more just futures. So it's truly a praxis, and I'm excited, Anthony, to hear a little bit more about your story. Please, by all means, take it away.
Oh, well, I think I made a deadly mistake by having you go first. Who wants to follow all that wonder? Thank you so much for setting it up and putting it in such a precise perspective as we look at how our lives were shaped by our experiences and our joys and our passions that we're now that we've been funneling, expressing through our art. And your story about, youth, the injustice you endured as a youth, of course, that's going to fuel a great deal of compassion for anything that smacks of injustice. And we see that every day. I have to say that, your generation, I grew up, I was born in the early 1950s, and when I still feel the impact and the exuberance and the spirituality of all those people going into the streets in reaction to George Floyd's injustice, his murder. And this was not just nationally, but internationally. Even though when I was a young teenager or a teenager in the 1960s, and the civil rights movements were, on TV every day, and I saw when the SNCC got involved, and we started to see children being water hosed and chased by dogs, and those kids looked like me. And that experience of seeing that level of cruelty, inhumanity to kids made me at that moment realize that I had to do something about that. And I wasn't sure, but when I got involved in music and I started hearing music by musicians like John Coltrane and Charles Mingus and Rahsaan Roland Kirk, and these musicians, Max Roach, my hero, my teacher, my collaborator, when I heard their music and the power and strength in their music, Abbey Lincoln singing "Freedom Now, Freedom Now," and that's what made me realize that music could be continue to be a voice of freedom. And that's been my experience as a jazz musician, because wherever I've gone on this planet, 4 or 5 continents, I can't keep track anymore, that wherever I've performed, there are people listening. If there's recorded music, they're listening to jazz, and even a handful is attempting to play it. And when we perform live, I remember we had a trip behind the Iron Curtain back in 1985, when there was East and West Berlin, and the continent of Europe was so divided. I remember playing behind the Iron Curtain, and we were playing free jazz. I mean, it was Jimmy Lyons from Cecil Taylor, myself, and Peter Kowald, and we were playing in Dresden and Leipzig and all these places. And it was attended, there were usually packed house. Americans performing, and we would finish our set, and the audience would stand up and give an encore that would last 10 minutes. And so we'd come back out and we'd perform maybe another half an hour, and we'd try to leave, and they do the same thing. So after the third set, we said, we can't do this anymore. And I asked them, because ich kann Deutsch sprechen, I asked, why are you so taken with this music? And their response was Freiheit, freedom. They experienced vicariously and through the emotional and spiritual connection of what we were doing, and they would not let us off stage. It was an experience that they probably never had with music. And so that was one of the reminders for me. Another reminder was when 1989, we were doing a benefit for the students in Tiananmen Square. It was right up the street at UC Berkeley in the International House. And it was attended by a lot of Asian students that were also supportive of the Tiananmen protest. And while we were almost completing our set, one student came running in because, you know, cell phones weren't that prevalent back then, and was saying, tanks are now entering the square. Tanks are running over people. And people just started freaking out. And the MC grabbed the mic and he said, no, jazz, let them finish. Jazz is freedom. And everybody just stopped and waited till we finished. And then everybody left the hall. We're playing our last tune, fortunately. So to me, I have been a witness to the power of music to transform. And the language, I always look at music, or all music as language, not literally, but the fact that they can transcend boundaries and borders and speak to people. I remember the orchestra that I lead, the Asian American Orchestra. We incorporate traditional Asian instruments into the jazz orchestra. And I remember we had a Chinese multi-instrumentalist, and I sat down and I played "Come Sunday," sung by Mahalia Jackson. And his English wasn't really that good. We could communicate, but within about a minute of the song, he's just started crying. And I just let it play through. And then I said, chi. And we just hugged each other because he felt the power of Mahalia Jackson singing the spiritual. And it transcended any language, but as a musician, it spoke directly to his heart and soul. So I've seen this with my eyes, and I know the power of music. I know that as a music historian, having worked at the Smithsonian, the relationship, particularly among African Americans, between protest and music, between civil rights and music, between all protestations, all movements for justice and for freedom, all have a musical soundtrack. And that, I think, speaks to why music, of all the arts, but of course poetry, when you started with poetry, but you're combining music and poetry. Woo, that's the one. So okay, so we're about halfway through this. I know we had a little bit of a late start, but I'd like to at least talk a little bit about mixed heritage, because it's obvious that's something that you and I both share. But I think, and now we have the picture of my parents' wedding. This was photographed in Tokyo, Japan, 1951. You'll see, and I embrace this picture because most wedding photos from Japan, the bride is always dressed in traditional Japanese formal attire. The groom is, more often than not, and most every picture I've seen, is dressed in a Western suit. Mm-hmm. So I asked my dad about this. I said, Dad, how Pop, I actually call him Pop, how come you're wearing, kimono? How come you're dressed in Japanese clothes? He said, son, I tried to get married to your mother, and the U.S. government kept stopping us. They put up so much red tape, we couldn't get married. I knew I was going to be sent to Korea, and I wanted to be married before we left, and they wouldn't allow us. When we came back, they changed the laws, but by then I had realized that I wanted to honor the country in which we got married. And the way I could do that was visually through what I wore. So my dad had a sense about him that was very unique. He was a race man in that he really extolled the virtues of the African-American race, their achievements, because he knew we weren't going to get it in school books. And he wanted us to know and feel proud of that heritage. Now, since I'm talking about mixed race, I had the great fortune of my dad being a career soldier, which meant that I grew up around the world. I was born in San Francisco, lived there for the first 9 years. San Francisco was very progressive. The United States Army had just desegregated the forces. So when I was born in 1953, I grew up on integrated Army bases. The people around me all looked either like me or close to me because the Army had a policy of keeping African American or any Americans married to Japanese, keeping them assigned on the West Coast. So the mothers, usually the mothers, could go back home. So fortunately, that was the policy, and my dad was assigned to Japan, Okinawa, in the early 60s. So I got to know my parents, my mother's family, because she's from Tokyo, and we would spend our summers with my mother's family. So my mother, having come to America when she was 27, she spoke mostly Japanese. My older brother, who was born in Japan before they came to America, spoke only Japanese when he arrived, and he was darker than me. So can you imagine the hell he caught? So I know my mom spoke Japanese when we were young. So that was my first language. But I totally feel like I grew up in a blended household. There's a term called doubles. There's a movie that Reggie Life made in 1995 called Doubles, Japan and America's Intercultural Children. And the term doubles was used to basically take over the term half, hapa or hafu, which meant half. And since the term originated in Hawaii, people were referred to hapa as half Japanese and half Hawaiian, because those were the two dominant cultures. And then it got broadened to me, Japanese and whatever, American or whatever. So the young Japanese, this was almost 25 years ago, started saying, no, we're not half anything. We're double. We take from both cultures. And that really resonated with me, that they had the consciousness to understand that both cultures are as important. You're not half anything. You're double. And that stuck with me because fortunately, my parents stayed together. I grew up in a two-parent household, and the influence from both sides was equally as strong. So for that, I'm totally grateful. And plus, the fact that I got to know my mother's family, that really enhanced and I think formed a real strong foundation for me to embrace Japanese culture, even though I spent most of my childhood in America. So that's why this picture to me means so much. It shows that my father had the maturity to embrace something beyond just the wedding day in his image. I think, our time is getting, we have to talk about our art rather than just our families.
Oh
but you set up such a tangent. You were all over the place. When you start with poetry, you set up a whole new situation. So I know we're supposed to talk. Maybe we should try to at least, the last two remaining subjects, solidarity, which, comes through our art, comes through our connection with our culture. So I'm not sure how much more we want to, talk about that. Recently I do want to talk something because people who are like us, and you've met some of them, Emily Akpan and Regina Boone, they've formed an organization.
We see y'all in the comments, by the way.
Are they in the comments? Oh yeah. Okay. Well, good. So they through the organization of Tsuru for Solidarity, which came out of the Japanese American community's commitment to seeing the injustice and pointing out the injustice of what's going on with our immigration policy, to the extent that they're actually opening up old internment camps that were used to incarcerate Japanese Americans during World War II. See, I'm getting a little loud and my culture's starting to come through, but they're using those now to house immigrants and then separated the children. Tsuru for Solidarity is the voice of the Japanese American community saying, we are with you. That solidarity is with you. And I was so glad when Emily and Regina started to, and so now Aisha, there's a whole group of us, a Black Nikkei, a Blackanese, there's a whole group, and I grew up with a few, but I haven't seen that many, particularly on screen, ever. So, that whole thing about unity and coming together, but, the whole idea of sharing our cultures and having shared our cultures throughout our lives, I think that that's something that leads up, again, to, because of you and I, we are both very sensitive. We are both in tune to, and I think that, this was portrayed in your honoring the, unceded land of the Native American people. My father comes from Choctaw heritage. I know that we here in Berkeley, California, and Oakland, we are on Ohlone Hoochie land, and it's very obvious. And I honor that. I honor that heritage. I honor that. I would honor that heritage even if I didn't have it in my bloodline, because I know and I see, as you do, the importance and the injustice against the original inhabitants of this land and what was done to them and continues to be done to them. So these are all the kinds of things we're trying to address. You know, these kinds of things that people don't seem to really come to grips with a way to deal, to finally, you know, come to grips, to negotiate the reconciliation, the recognition and reconciliation of what has happened on this land. I think that that's something that also is something we address. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I have one little clip I want to show from my last collaboration, which involved Angela Davis, whom I revere. So, so hopefully we'll have time for that. But I'm turning it back over to you, Aisha, because I know you want to talk about what you do, and you do that so passionately.
I mean, you covered so much there. I'm like, where do we even begin? That was amazing. And also that shout out to Tsuru and all. It's just, there's so much. I feel both so inspired and also feeling all the dynamics of these times, whether it's from the election to Rona to all the things like that, spaces like this, and seeing y'all, whether in the comment box or our way of all the different ways we're learning to connect and adapt, has given me so much heart. So I just want to send a note of gratitude in that sense. One thing that stuck out to me that I wanted to build on, you mentioned the idea of hafu, hapa, daburu, all these different terms. And I think, you know, after many years, I embrace the multiple aspects of my identity. And I like to say that I am abundant. That's kind of the term I've landed on. And part of why I do that is that I feel, or the more I reflected on terms like hafu, or even people saying like, oh, which half do you like more? Or, oh, you're a quarter this, you're an eighth that, all these different kinds of terms, which I still struggle with today. Those are terms that are so pervasive, so strong, that I think it's hard to sometimes shake them. But I feel that they're very deeply also tied to scientific forms of racism and these ideas that we can be, you know, sectioned out into pie pieces, or all these different kinds of, you know, ideas around race. And it's not to say that racialized experience, that's real, right? Racism is real, like all these different kinds of isms and the cultural heritages and all these different elements of our identities. But I also I'm trying to find ways and new language to not reify the kinds of categories that have been used to oppress for generations. So it's something that hearing what you were saying, I think resonated and just brings alive. I'm so curious to also hear about your experiences growing up and what it was like as a young person, you know, navigating, like, if for me, the what are you question was kind of like one of the predominant things. I'm curious about your experience around that. I don't know if you wanted to chime in. I see you.
Well, I can, because in 1950s America, you know, it didn't matter whether, you know, you were Black and or Japanese. It was a matter of being white or not. And it still is. And that's almost 70 years ago. So, you know, I view identity from two different perspectives, one inward and one outward. And inward, I view myself as both African, Choctaw, and Japanese. Product of my parents. I embrace both ethnicities equally, just as I love both of my parents equally. My childhood was, even though I had, you know, the blessing of being in an integrated community, went to integrated schools, lived in an integrated neighborhood, that didn't shield me from the racism that is, you know, in America's DNA. When we returned from Japan after being there 4 years, my dad was stationed on Okinawa. My father couldn't find housing on base, so we had to live what they used to call the economy, you know, or in civilian quarters. And he had found a house, but unfortunately, he found it. This was in Southern California, in North Torrance. Right. So here we are in Los Angeles, and he found a place that was in a red line district. So there were no Black people. And I remember when I showed up in school, I kind of looked around, and then I got called into the principal's office, and he said, "Well, you know, you're the only Negro in school." And I said, "Yeah, I can see that." You know, you know, I didn't have the experience that you had, where a teacher actually belittled me because of her racism. She used, you know, her racism to belittle me. I didn't have too many of those experiences. But what I did, you know, pretty much encounter was the systemic way that things were handled. Fortunately, I went to integrated schools for the most part, but that one experience I had, and that was my 8th and 9th grade. My older brother, who taught me how to play guitar when we were in Japan and taught me how to play the blues, he went on to play with Bo Diddley. So he was my idol. Mike, I mean, I wanted to be like Mike.
Yeah.
But you know, when we came back from Japan, he was a lettered varsity sportsman. I mean, baseball, track, tennis. He even was a high jumper on you know, from the diving board. You know, he had me up there doing triple somersaults. I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't even think of doing something like that now. But you know, and he was, you know, and he was playing in a band, and you know, all the girls are all, you know. Anyway, so when we left Japan, Kubasaki High School was where he went. I went to Kubasaki Junior High. For anybody else, probably. Anyway, so when we came and we moved to that all-white neighborhood, I saw my brother go from hero to zero. And he was so demoralized by, and I just couldn't understand, because we didn't have the emotional armor to deal with racism. We had not developed that, you know, to the extent that we lived in an all-white neighborhood and we encountered racism on a daily basis. There were people, we moved in 1966, there were people still sitting on their houses with shotguns because of the Watts riots. The family next to us moved out within a week after we moved in, and catty-cornered us, they moved out. So that was a devastating experience, but it set me on a path, just like that math test score. You know, it was okay. All right, I will do something. I didn't understand racism, but then when I went to college, that I majored in music and psychology. I wanted to understand what was this almost surreal, you know, supernatural power, racism that seemed to exist, but nobody wanted to talk about it. And so, you know, so I tried to merge both my academic scholarship plus my art, plus, you know, bringing in my life experiences. Now, I have to take a time out to say I am here as a walking ad for my wife's office. She works in a satellite office from the University of California Law School, which is called the Community Law Center, where they offer legal services to underserved communities. So I'm basically advertising her work with this. It is what I wear when I go out to like the women.
Okay, we see you.
You know, so anyway, let's talk about our music making. I know you have examples that you want to share with people. I have one example I'd like to share. I mentioned it earlier. It's a trailer for a documentary, forthcoming short documentary on our collaboration with, you know, Sister Dr. Angela Davis. And so if I got 6 minutes to show that, I'd love it, but you got the rest.
Gosh, oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad that this is a cipher, right? Exchanging energy back and forth. That feels so good. And I guess the things that some of the points that you brought up, and I thank you so much for sharing so much of your story. I mean, we could go on for so long. There's a lot to cover. So many powerful stories. Some of the things that come up when you're telling those stories, especially about touring and connecting with folks, I think about even in just, I guess, the last set of years in touring on the road, being in places like Belarus, where there continue to be protests. People are still working to get their voices heard, and there's a lot of brutality happening. I think about going to Kazakhstan and working with students, and they're like, wait, I started a global hip hop project called RAPtivism, which is one of the things that I guess folks associate with who I be or who I'm becoming. And that's a project that has spanned over 20 different countries across 4 continents and counting. And so talking about RAPtivism in places like Kazakhstan and seeing light bulbs pop up and young people starting to create their own ciphers, to create their own spaces, and also using the power of this microphone to then channel funding to folks who, like, for example, young B-girls who were not getting the same grants as the young B-boys. And it was hard enough to even do hip hop in the first place, people thinking that they're bananas for doing it, So it's been kind of, I hear a lot of resonance in our stories in a way. Although not in person, like having the honor to share stages virtually with Angela Davis, and even some of the jazz connectivity, sharing stages with Herbie Hancock, among others, and that's connected to hip hop. And you can go into the whole, diaspora elements of all these musical forms. I remember going to Senegal, and when I was living in Senegal, people, first of all, check out the hip hop movements, right? 2 presidential elections have been changed by the course of hip hop led movements in Senegal, right? People they're like, don't sleep on that. That's amazing. And working with some of the artists to help lead those movements. I remember one group told me, well, hip hop, I know folks want to say it started in the States. That's one cool story. We're down with that. And we believe that it's connected to griot storytelling, right? And so their album was called Boomerang, and they were talking about the travel of that whole element of griot storytelling. And so I guess I tell this because in some ways, some of these traditions that we are practicing, these liberatory traditions, are ancient. In some ways, they're connected to, even in Kazakhstan, people were like, oh, we do freestyle. We do, and it's called itis though. And we have this little, stringed instrument, and we tap on the front as we pluck. So it has both percussive and, you can have the melodies and the harmonies and kind of rap on top of it or do storytelling. And so I think about the ways in which music has humbled me and taught me about the connectivity, going to places like Estonia, talking to the president there about the literal shifts in politics that have manifested and is kind of embedded deeply in their history. That this has kind of been a life lesson in the making, ongoing in this love work. And it makes me think, I guess, before we segue to some of these clips, it just makes me think about the power of our voices during this time. Sometimes, and it doesn't have to just be the vocal. I mean, one thing I'm really curious and interested in is the vocal cords and studying that consistently, but also just the many different voices, both inwards, the voice that we have reflect back towards ourselves, that self-awareness, that mindfulness. What is it to settle and rest and or refuel in times like these, for example? The outward voice, what it is we're projecting, and the collective voice that we have together, and the connective pieces, so that we're not only lining up according to the boxes that someone else is handing us, but really understanding intersectionality, not from a standpoint of these are my multiple identities, so this is what I represent, but also looking at the ways in which power and oppression, different systems of power and oppression intersect, and how we can use that as a leverage to shift what we see, who we be. Anthony, I want to make sure that there's time for your video clip. So should we jump into that?
If we can. And then you got, we just take it from you. You got it. You open the show, you close the show.
Oh, no.
Is that something we can get up? I'm sure. Oh, here comes Eric. Oh, there we go. Yeah, maybe we get full screen on that. Oh, and bring up the sound. There we go. Okay, cool.
Down by the riverside, I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield. Oh, down by the riverside, ain't gonna study war no more.
2018 marks the 50th anniversary of the assassination of our nation's foremost leader of the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. In 1968, King was assassinated when he was 39 years old. 1 year to the date before he was assassinated, he delivered a speech at the Riverside Church where he came out and spoke to the American people about the injustice of America killing the Vietnamese people in a war that he felt, and history now shows, was an indefensible war for America to have been involved in. And I'm sure that the American psyche and the American history and the American soul regrets our involvement in that war. The composition is entitled Down by the Riverside, Requiem for a King. And the piece features the Asian American Orchestra. Realizing that this project needed the voice of somebody who could really speak with the authority and the veracity of somebody as prophetic as Dr. King, I invited Dr. Angela Davis to participate in this collaboration, and she agreed.
I've always been interested in music and art. I think people are affected by music in a way that is much more profound, much deeper than simply a speech that a political activist might give. I think often artists are able to allow us to feel that which we have not yet learned how to say.
Down by the Riverside, the title is taken from a spiritual, which includes the lyrics, I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, ain't gonna study war no more. I felt, he delivered the speech at the Riverside Church. Here we have a spiritual that references the riverside. I felt it was a perfect fit.
Take my hand, lead me on. That which touches me most is I am touching to wherever we will. Passing on to others, that which was passed on to me. Freedom cannot rest. Children are marching for their future. Children are marching for their lives. They are saying, to borrow the words of the inimitable elevator, and we join her. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Thank you, Eric and Celine, for sharing that.
So powerful. Well, I guess we're coming up on the hour, so to speak. I would love to share. I guess I was thinking we could close with a song that's kind of been on my heart. It's called "Missing You," and as Eric pulls that up, I don't know if there are any final. I want to just shout out all the incredible folks who have joined us. Anthony, we saw your website link, but do you want to give that again for folks, or ways that folks can find you online and keep
Sure.
in touch?
It's my nonprofit. It's www.fifthstream, just like fourth, fifth, fifthstreammusic.org, fifthstreammusic.org. You can just Google Anthony and Anthony Brown Jazz,
Awesome.
and it'll take you there too. Okay. Well, here we go. Yay.
Thank you, Eric.
I've been missing you, missing you. Did you know that I still care? I've been trying to, learning to follow through, even when you're not there. Want you to know that it hurts sometimes. Want you to know that I'm still alright. I've been missing you, missing you. Yes, it's true, incredible, so indelible. Wanna hold you close, will not let go. Centrifugal, centrifugal. Let us rise and never fall. No more burden, burden, burden. Let them talk and we will fly from this, from all this hurting, hurting, hurting. La la da da, 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 la la da da. This is just to say that I'm missing you today, today. We will never fade away, never fade away, fade away. I've been missing you. Yes, it's true, incredible, so indelible. Wanna hold you close, will not let go. Centrifugal, centrifugal. I've been missing you, missing you, missing you. Incredible, so indelible. Wanna hold you close, will not let go. Centrifugal. Let us rise and never fall. No more burden, burden, burden. Let them talk and we will fly from this, from all this hurting, hurting, hurting. This is just to say that I'm missing you today, today. This is just to say that I'm missing you today.
Thank you. Thank y'all. I see so much love in the comments. It's been a true joy to share this hour with you all. And you can find me at aishafukushima.com. Global Aisha on Facebook and Aisha Fukushima on Instagram. And once again, Anthony Brown, incredible, fifthstreammusic.org. Got to check that out for sure. And then I guess we are slowly, yes, I see I see some comments, missing each other. Yes.
Yes.
I think that song keeps playing through my head during this time when we might be far away from loved ones, and a reminder of when I say that we need each other, for me, that's like a very basic way of rooting in solidarity, like the building blocks of solidarity, how much we need each other, and what is that interdependence, what does that caring, that collective care and healing look like. So I hope that was felt in some of the vibrations of the song. And I guess we need to wrap. If there are any final questions or things that need to be shouted out, let's do it.
I'll tell you what, you stay on comments. I'll go to private chat because we should close very soon. Okay.
Yes. Well, that's a wrap, y'all.
Yeah. I didn't see any questions come in, but I want to, like you, Aisha, I want to thank all the people who did join us today and share this event with us, and all the wonderful comments we got from some of the viewers. So yes, Aisha, and to hear you, to get to know you, and even though we're not in the same space, I still feel we're spiritually connected, and just thank you so much. Continue to do what you do. It's so important what you're doing. It's so much. It's needed, and now more than ever. And when I look at you and I think of that we have a vice president who kind of resembles kind of us. So it's getting there. It's getting there, but it's been like, and we're still trying to get there.
Yes,
because there are some forces.
Oh my gosh!
But we just got to keep hope alive. Hope springs maternal, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh. This is so good. Thank you so much. And I'm just echoing all that appreciation back at you. Thank you for your liberation work by way of jazz and all the things, because we know that you do so many different elements of that liberation work. And thank you again to all the folks who organized this. Thanks, Rob. Y'all are just incredible. We so appreciate you. And we'll look forward to keeping in touch. Thanks, y'all.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, Aisha, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And till the next one, peace.
Peace.
You say this kill black and brown, and when will you talk about class in this story? The rest is allegory. Come together, unionize, see it through each other's eyes. No need to fight over supplies while workers save lives. They need protection too. What we gonna do? Organize our way through. And for those behind bars, we must fight hard. Global pandemic, endemic, systemic. No equality, no quality of life,